There are quite a few things I need to track on the web, from price changes to out-of-stock products to news articles and even software releases, just to name a few. And the system that I have for tracking these now isn't that great. I usually bookmark the website and check it myself, or sign up for in-stock notifications when a product is out of stock, and I don't have a great system for tracking prices of the things I want to buy. Recently, I started using this self-hosted solution called ChangeDetection to help me solve all of this and more. ChangeDetection allows me to detect any change on any website I want, from a simple snapshot comparison all the way to price change and restock detection. Oh, and you know those pesky websites that don't allow you to deep link to a page? Well, I figured out how to install and configure a headless browser so we can automate all of the steps to get you to that page that you want to monitor. Oh, and get this, it even has a Chrome extension to help you easily add sites to monitor. So today, we're going to get ChangeDetection installed, configure some sites to monitor, and then we'll configure a headless Chrome browser to run our automations. And then we'll even get the Chrome extension working with our self-hosted instance that's running in a Docker container. Oh, and speaking of Docker, thank you to Docker for sponsoring today's video. How do you know if your container images have vulnerabilities? And I'm not talking about just the container image itself, but what about the packages that are used within that image? Well, Docker Scout solves this security challenge by analyzing your software bill of materials, which is a list of all your software packages that make up software components that we're using. Scout can quickly cross-reference this against multiple CVE databases to help identify vulnerabilities and suggest remediation if possible, and it's pretty simple to use. So check it out. I have this container that I'm building, and I'll push it up to a Docker Scout-enabled repository in Docker Hub. It's a simple web service using Express.js, but before releasing it, I want to see if there are any CVEs with the version of Express that I'm using. So I'll run Docker Scout and filter on CVEs for Express. So you can see right here that Scout found a CVE, and it tells me it's fixed in Express versions higher than my version of 4.17.1. So let's update Express in my package.json, and let's build that container image again. And then we push it up to Docker Hub. And then if we scan again with Docker Scout, you can see that it's all fixed. This works on Docker Desktop and even on the Docker Scout dashboard, where you can see much more insights for software supply chain management. So check out Docker Scout and start analyzing your software today. There's only one thing you need to get this running today, and that's a machine running Docker. Now, Docker can be running on Windows, Mac, or Linux. That's the beauty of Docker. But you'll need a machine that has Docker running. If you need help getting that installed, I'll have documentation on my documentation site, and you can find a link to that in the description below. Then you'll need terminal access to this machine. That can be via SSH or just open up a terminal if you're on the machine that has Docker installed on it. So I'm going to SSH into my Docker machine. Once I get in there, I'll see a usual prompt. Let me clear this out. And then I should be in my home directory. So if I do a pwd, present working directory, you can see I'm in my home directory for this user called server admin. Once here, I'm going to make a directory called ChangeDetection, and this will house our data plus the configuration. So if I do an ls, I see ChangeDetection. Next, I want to cd into there. And then typically what I do is I create a data folder inside of here to house any data that we need, and then my compose file for Docker. So let's do that really quick. So I want to mkdir data, and then do an ls, make sure, yep, I have data. Then I want to do a touch compose.yaml. And if I do an ls, you can see my compose.yaml and my data folder. Okay, so what goes in a compose file and what goes in the data folder? Well, let's take a look at the Docker compose that I put together. So there's a lot going on in this compose stack, but I'll kind of break it down into the individual pieces that are here. So first we have our ChangeDetection service. It's pulling down that image. We're naming that container. We're setting the host name inside, then I'm mounting a volume, data/data store. So we have our data folder. We just need to make this data store folder now. And then we're mapping that to the inside of the data store folder for this container. And that's where this container stores all of its data, hence the name data store. And then we're exposing a port 5000 on both sides. You could change that if you want. Then we have an environment variable. We have one for WebDriver and one from Playwright driver. We'll get into that a little bit later, but really I want to comment this out right now because we're not going to use it at first. And then we have a dependency saying, hey, we depend on Playwright Chrome and make sure that service is started before we start up ourselves. And if we look down here, you can see the other service in this stack called Playwright Chrome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out too, and we'll get back to it here in a little bit. but I want this to be a minimum version of a compose file so we can get this up and running, and then we can talk about some of the advanced use cases and enable them in a little bit. So since this depends on that service that we just stopped, let's actually comment that out. So now we have a pretty simple Docker compose file. Create a service, open some ports, maps and volumes, start it up. So let's actually do that really quick. So we have 2 tasks, create this folder, and the second task is to copy the contents of this into that compose file. I'm going to make things a little bit easier than SSHing in and copying those files over. What I'm going to use is this remote SSH from Microsoft. And this allows me to remote into that server, do an SSH session, and use Visual Studio Code to actually edit that file and even explore the file system. So I have that enabled. So I'm going to connect to host. I already have this set up. I'm going to connect to my Docker test machine. And here we go. This should open up right here. If I make that bigger, then I'm going to open up a folder, and here's my home directory on that server. And you can see the change detection folder that we made. I can just open that folder right here, say OK, and here we are now inside of that server. So the first task was to create a data store inside of the data folder. There's that. And the next was copy the contents from my local machine into that compose file there. The other cool thing about this extension is if you open a terminal, I'm actually in this machine right here. How do I know that? Because I'm going to go to a host name and it says Docker test. So pretty cool. Now that everything's good to go, I can run a Docker compose up-d --force recreate. I know I don't need to force recreate now, but later on I will. And I'll probably even remove dangling ones later, but you'll see that here in a little bit. So let's bring the stack up. It's downloading this image. Then it's going to extract the image, and then it's going to run the container. Okay, container started, and cool, we saw some folders get created right here, and so that's pretty awesome. So how do we get there? Well, we said it's on port 5000, so let's open up a browser and go to that server's IP on port 5000. And if you don't know what your IP is, like I forgot what my IP is, just do an IP space A if you're on an Ubuntu-like system. You can see right here, mine's 192.168.60.40. And once we get here, we can see our dashboard with change detection running with a few sites to test that are actually going out and checking for changes already. But we'll talk about that. First thing we need to do, absolutely need to do, is go to dark mode. That's a lot better. So now we're in dark mode. Cool, so we can see on our dashboard that a couple of sites are already set up. We can see Hacker News is set up, and then a change log for change detection that's already set up. And you can see that these were last checked 2 minutes ago, so these already went out and checked for changes, and it didn't detect any changes yet, which is pretty awesome that it's already doing this without any configuration. Now, if you want to see what it detected on Hacker News, you could see this is what it detected. And we could see this is a text version of what it detected. So it's stripping out a lot of the contents here and just showing us the text. And if we want to see a screenshot, we actually can't. We'll get that going here in a little bit. And if you want to go see Hacker News, you can, and it'll take you out to Hacker News. But that's not what we want to do, so let's close Hacker News. And the same goes for changelog.io. It's doing the same thing. Now, if we wanted to recheck this, we could click the recheck, and that would fire off a job to go recheck this site to see if there are any changes. We can fire that off right now for Hacker News. There might be some changes because it changes often. And so now this change is queued up. So it's actually firing up an agent right now to go look at the site and do a comparison. And we could see it found a difference. So you could see it last checked 15 seconds ago, and it last changed 15 seconds ago. And now instead of the preview button, we're seeing a diff. So let's look at the diff. And if we look at the diff, we can see the difference between the site before and after. We can see the red is the from, so this is the initial snapshot it took, and the green is to. So we can see that this link on Hacker News just got another point. It went from 67 to 68. And again, we don't have any screenshots, but we'll have that in a little bit. Now you can use regex or regex, however you want to say it, to extract some additional data from that. We're not going to do it, but say you wanted to extract some data from Hacker News or from the site you're scraping, you can actually do that and then store it off however you want. But we're not going to do that. What we are going to do is look at some of the settings for this change detection for the site. Just going to call it a job from now on, this change job. So if we edit this job, we'll see some options here. So the URL we're going to scrape. We wanted to name this, give it a better name, Hacker News. We could. We can add a tag to it, which helps us filter on our dashboard. And then we could change the interval that this job runs on. So right now it's set globally. If you wanted to override the global setting, you could do it here. I'm not going to override it because we'll see the global setting here in a minute. We could extract the title from the document if we wanted and put it in our title. And then we can choose whether or not we can send a notification when the filter can no longer be found on the page. So this is pretty nice that if you set up a filter, you set up something to track, if it no longer appears, do you want it to alert you or not alert you? So they're saying, hey, yes, send a notification when the filter can no longer be found on the page. This will make some more sense later on, but let's continue on to requests. And requests for this job, this is the actual agent that goes out and does the scraping or parsing or whatever you want to call it. So all we have right now is an HTTP client that goes out to the page and says, hey, give me all of the HTML or give me the source for this page and bring it back, and then we'll do some comparisons. So it's not going to run any JavaScript, any CSS. It's not going to run anything like that. It's just going to scrape using this agent and bring it back in plain text. Actually bring it back in code, and then you do some plain text parsing. And that works good for most sites, but we're going to use WebDriver or Headless Chrome later on, and I'll show you that. And then these other settings will be enabled when we enable that Headless Chrome. And notifications, this is where we would override our notifications for this job. So we're looking at a job. Let's actually look at the global settings because that's where I like to configure most of my settings. So now I'm in the global settings. This is probably where you want to configure most of your settings and then override per job if you need to. But we can see the time between check or the interval for this job is 3 hours. So once every 3 hours. Then you can add some jitter to this check if you want, kind of randomizing the time it goes out and checks. So if we're doing it every 3 hours, you could give it something like 60 seconds of randomness to kind of throw in there. Just so you don't set off any alarms for bot detection. And this is probably a good point, since I mentioned bot detection, to say that you are technically a bot. So my advice to you is to be respectful, keep your intervals pretty high, don't hammer sites, otherwise they'll probably block you, and considering you're running this out of your home machine, then your home is blocked from that site too. Anyways, be kind. Then there are some additional settings here. So we can actually set a password on this site if we want. So I'm going to set a password right here. I'm going to save it. So you can password protect the site if you want. And you can see I gave it a password and automatically booted me out. So I'm going to type in my password again and we're back in. So this is pagination for the dashboard. How big is our page size when we page through them? We can extract the titles, some of the things we saw earlier. So we can extract the title if we want and set that as the title. And we can treat empty pages as a change. That's really up to you. Do you want to detect an empty page as a change? Or do you want to kind of ignore empty pages because most pages shouldn't be empty? And if that happens, you really don't need to know about it. It's really up to you. I'm going to leave it unchecked though. Notifications, you can actually set up a ton of notifications, and they have a wiki on setting up notifications, or you could even use Apprise and then send it anywhere you want to for ones that they don't support. But I do want to support notifications, and I use Discord, so I'm going to paste in my webhook here, and it will automatically parse this webhook and send it to my private Discord server whenever it detects a change, which is pretty cool. And you can see on my private Discord here, I was testing some out, but if I send a test notification now, there's my test notification, so it's working. So cool, notification sent, I send it to my Discord. If you want to send it to somewhere else, look at their wiki on how to configure that. We'll configure fetching a little bit different than it's configured now here in a little bit. We're not going to use the plain text HTTP client, but we are going to use Headless Chrome. We'll configure that here in a few. Some global filters, if you wanted to. I'm actually not going to touch this, but if you wanted to remove elements from the pages it's scraping or ignore pieces of text, you can do all of that here. API, it comes with an API, which is pretty cool, and we'll use this to configure a Chrome extension here in a little bit. And then CAPTCHA and proxies, this is probably another good place to say, hey, if you're going to be scraping at scale, you're not going to want to do this from home. You're probably going to use a data provider or a scraping mechanism or whatever you want to call it, a proxy that you can proxy through that can randomize your agent and your IP so it doesn't look like you're actually scraping them. Now, we're going to be respectful, so we're not going to use a proxy, but if you needed to use a proxy, you can configure one of these here or configure your own proxy if you wanted. If you had one, say, in the cloud and you wanted to proxy through there, you absolutely could with a forward proxy. But again, we're going to be kind and respectful, so we don't need to set up a proxy, and we don't need to set up anything like solving CAPTCHAs for us. And then outside of that, you can mass import some websites, and you can actually back up your configuration too. Okay, so that's cool. How do we add a new site? Well, it's pretty easy. Let's do this, HTTPS, and I'm going to add techno-tim.github.io. So this is my documentation site that's hosted on GitHub. I would use my real technotim.live site, but I kind of have some DNS magic going on internally, and this is on a protected network that can't get to my servers that are kind of internal. Anyways, long story short, if you want to use technotim.live, do it. But again, be nice. Otherwise, you can go at it with GitHub, where my documentation is also hosted. So I'm going to call this personal sites. Personal. I'll just call it personal. So we're going to go out to technotim.github.io, and let's do a watch now. So if I click watch, it's actually set up here now. And then you can see it's queued up. And then after a few seconds, it's ready to go. And if I preview it, you can see my blog or my documentation site. But again, it's only in text. So cool. That's setting up a new site, and it's pretty boring if we're just going to do text. So let's actually get a headless browser going so we can configure that, and we can actually drive and automate that browser to do some cool stuff for us. So just a quick overview of headless browsers. If you haven't done anything with headless browsers before, one is called a headless browser because there is no UI for it. And why is that important? Well, it uses a lot less resources, and it doesn't take a lot of requirements from the operating system to actually render that UI, which means you can run a browser in a terminal, which means then you can run it in CI. So you can kind of see where this is going, maybe not. But I've used headless browsers for a long time to test a lot of my websites in CI, and you could spin up a browser, and then you can drive that browser with some additional configuration and then run tests against those sites. So there are a whole bunch of drivers for driving browsers. Selenium is a super popular one that I've used for many, many years. But another one that's just come up recently is called Playwright. And Playwright's pretty cool because it's fast, modern, and it was built for this kind of work. And on top of that, they have one API that you can use to drive many browsers. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Playwright control a headless Chrome to gather data from those websites and not just the HTML, an actual rendered page, so that we can automate that page and navigate around and get to exactly where we want to be on a website, and we can monitor that piece of the website. So a lot of cool things we can do. Let's hop back into the compose file and enable these. So going back to our compose file, remember we disabled a few things. Well, let's re-enable some of these. So on our change detection service, what we want to do is enable our environment variables, and then we want to enable our dependencies. So we want to say, hey, this is now depending on Playwright Chrome to be started before this will start up. And so I'm going to leave both of these environment variables here. You can only use one. And so if you want to use WebDriver with Selenium, you can just uncomment that and uncomment this piece right here, browser Chrome, and then you can run Selenium with headless Chrome. But I found that Playwright actually runs a lot better, and it has a lot more kind of quality of life features to make sure that the browser stays connected, it's not detected, and a few things like that. And I found it's just less flaky with Playwright. So anyways, I'm going to enable Playwright here, and we're saying, hey, this is where you're going to find Playwright. So it's going to open up a WebSocket to Playwright Chrome, which is this service right here on port 3000. So we better enable this service right here. So let's enable this service in the stack. So we're going to enable it. We're giving it that host name so that we can connect to it by that host name up here. And then the image, restart and let's stop. And then we're going to give it a whole bunch of environment variables to basically configure that browser that's headless that's running in the background. We're setting a width, screen depth, some performance optimizations. We're actually blocking ads. We're enabling the stealth plugin. We're doing a couple of things, and then a couple of other settings. But really, these are just some settings that we're applying to that browser when it starts. So Now that we have that, let's actually go back into our terminal, which we were down here. Let's clear this out. Let's see where we're at. LS. Okay, we are in data store, which we actually don't want to be there. We want to be one up, right? Yeah. So this is where our compose YAML is. We're going to do a docker compose up-d-force recreate. I'm going to actually say remove orphans too. I should start using this flag too, because if you start adding and removing services from your stack and recreating it, you could orphan a service, and so I want to remove them. So I'm going to start using this flag too, because now everything will always work. So let's do this, recreate this, remove orphans, force recreate. We can see it's pulling down this Playwright Chrome image right now, and this is a pretty big image, 1.24 gigs. And that's because it has Chrome. It has a whole bunch of dependencies that it needs in order to run Chrome. Which is also a good point to say, you're going to need a decent amount of RAM, depending on how many jobs you're going to run concurrently. If you think of how much RAM it takes to open Chrome, think about that too, but with a headless browser, but probably a lot less because you're not opening the whole UI. That being said, just make sure you have a couple of extra gigs of RAM in this machine that's running this Docker container. Looks like it's running, so let's run a Docker PS just to make sure. Yes, it's running. I see two things running, and they are ChangeDetection and Playwright. Pretty cool. So now let's go back to ChangeDetection, our website that's running locally. And if we go back to here, now when we go into settings, we should see if we go into fetching, we can change now our fetch method. So no longer are we going to use this plain text HTTP client. We're going to run Headless Chrome and render that page using JavaScript so we can get a really rich experience when we scrape. So let's save this really quick. And then if we go back to our dashboard, hey, we can now see that we have a Chrome icon. So pretty cool. This means, hey, we're going to use a Chrome browser now. So let's recheck this right now. Let's just force it to rerun. I'm actually going to force all of these to rerun. So I'll queue up a couple. And a cool thing, if you want to actually see these Chrome processes running, just run a top inside of that machine. You should see one Chrome here, one Chrome here, one Chrome here. So it's spinning up Chrome and it's running and going and scraping that site, and it's going to pull it all back into ChangeDetection. Okay, so they all ran. So now when we go into the preview for that site, we see text. But if we go into screenshot, we can see a screenshot now of the website that it just scraped. So this is pretty cool. So we get a screenshot to see, hey, what was the last thing you actually saw? So if I was a user to go there with a browser, what was the last thing it rendered out? And it's this. So let's check out the other two just to make sure they work. Preview, text is text, screenshot, nothing. Oh, I know why. That's because this one overrides our default agent. So let's actually change that. So let's go in here to edit, and I bet it's in requests. Yep. And so this one is overriding the global settings. So I'm going to say, hey, use this system default, and let's save that. And I think it usually re-queues it right away as soon as you make changes to it. Yeah, we saw it. Yep, there it goes. It was queued and checking now. Let me just make sure that this one for Hacker News is also using our default. It's not, it's using plain text. Now for these two sites, it's probably a good idea to use plain text. There's no reason to fire up a whole big browser to go and scrape to look at basically text on the web. But I'm going to do it because it looks nice, and this is a demo example. So that one's queued up. They're both checking now. Okay, so now if we go to a screenshot, hey, here's a screenshot of that ChangeDetection IO, their changelog. And then if we go into Hacker News, same thing. Detected some changes. We can see a screenshot now of Hacker News. So pretty cool. This is pretty cool. But now we can do some really cool things. So what are some things I like to track? Firmware releases, you guessed it, or basically software releases. It's so hard for me to keep track of all these websites and my bookmarks and go to them and remember what the last version was. But now I can add a change detection or a job to go do that for me. So I'm actually going to add in the firmware, the BMC for my Supermicro motherboard. And let's do a watch and edit because I want to title this. And this is this. I'm just going to title it this. And it is the BMC. And then a group tag, I'm going to say this is software. Could call it firmware, but I'm going to call it software. Let's go into the request, use the system default. And I think the rest of this should be pretty good. So let's save that. And then while that's going, I'm going to do one more for the actual firmware, the BIOS for that. So let's do the same thing. Let's add that site. This is the model right here of the motherboard. And then I'm just going to say it's BIOS, and I'm going to call this software. Let's save that. Cool. The other one looked like it may have finished. So let's do a preview. Screenshot. There it is. All right. So it's tracking my BMC now, my firmware for my Supermicro motherboard. Now, if this ever changes, I'll know right away. Awesome. And we should have the same for my firmware as well. So this looks like it just ran. Yep. Preview just now. Same text as well as the screenshot. Cool. So this is all working. But how do I track firmware or software updates for something that doesn't give me a deep link? For instance, my Elgato, my wavelink that I'm actually using right now. So if I go to their website and I select a product and I say it's audio and I say the Wave XLR, then I have options between Windows and Mac. But if we take a peek at this URL, you can see it hasn't changed. So there isn't a client-side route that we can deep link to the site. But that's why we installed Playwright and the Chrome browsers. So let's copy this URL really quick. Let's go into ChangeDetection. Let's actually queue this up, and I'm going to do edit and watch. And then I'm going to name this Elgato XLR, and then I'm going to name this software again. Okay, but before we save now, let's actually make sure the request is right. It is. Let's go into browser steps. This is where it gets really awesome. So I can actually record the steps to drive the browser to that download page. So let's do that. Click here to start. So it's going to render that page for me. This is all in real time. I'm going to talk so you can see roughly how quickly it goes. There it goes. So it rendered. Once we get here, we can go to select product. And you can see once I clicked on this element that got highlighted, it added a step. So yes, I'm going to say, okay, let's apply that. And I think this will just select the element. We might have to click it twice. So now it applied that. Nope, it did expand this. So now I have to click here, which this gets kind of odd, but I think it's using like accessibility, navigation to select these elements. Either way, as you can see, I didn't have the option to select audio. First, I have to set the focus to this drop-down menu. So let's apply there. And this will set the focus, I think, on this drop-down menu. And then I should be able to get to individual elements. So I want to click on audio. Do you remember where it was? It was audio. So I'm going to apply this now. And now I can see my Wave XLR. So I want to click on the Wave XLR. Let's apply and record that step. So the apply is basically record plus apply to what we see. And as you can see here, now we're on this page. So I can see the software update of Wavelink 1.0. So let's actually save this as my steps. And so I saved it, and you can see down here this little squiggly line basically tells me that, hey, browser steps is enabled. Yeah, so basically we just recorded an automation to drive Chrome to get to what we wanted to see. So this is queued up and it's checking now. This might take, I don't know, 10, 20 seconds. Quicker than that. So now let's do a preview of what it saw. There's the tree. But if we go to screenshot, here we go. Now we can see that we are on this page and we get a screenshot of this page and we can see the version is 1.10. So pretty cool that we are able to get there. The diff though is going to be on this page, as you could see, but since we navigated all the way to here, I would assume that 1.10.1 is right here. Wavelink. And so it still did extract the text so it can compare. You can see filter by system, and there's our wavelink. So if this wavelink version changes, we can see it here, and it'll show the diff of the next version, and then we can verify that it is rendering what we expect it to here. So pretty cool, pretty powerful. So another thing I mentioned I'd like to track is the price of products. So let's say I wanted to track something from, I don't know, Ubiquity. Let's say I wanted to track this Dream Machine Pro Max. Let's say I wanted to track this price and let me know if the price changes, whether it goes up or down, hopefully down, but let me know if the price changes. So let's copy this URL to this right here. So let's paste this in here and let's just do a watch. Let's set it up and let's let it scrape. While it's going, I guess we can edit it, and I'm going to call this a Unify Dream Machine Pro Max. Just going to name this that, and then we name this group shopping. Save this again. And here you can see, while it was scraping, it said, hey, we detected price that was embedded in this. Do we only want to follow the price? And for this, I actually do, because I don't care about anything else on that page, whether it changed. I only care whether the price has changed. So I'm going to say yes. Now it shows you this price tag, and it lets you know that, hey, it's just going to track price changes, which is pretty cool. So let's go into preview really quick. So this is pretty cool. If we go to the text, it actually found the JSON response coming back from their servers, and it can find the price right here. And now it's just going to detect it from this JSON. It doesn't need to even render the whole screen and do any kind of parsing. It detected it from this JSON response. So pretty cool. Pretty cool. And if we look at the screenshot, we can see the same thing. This is really just for me to let me know that, hey, it's finding the right thing or rendering the right page. So cool, that's one thing I like to do with products. Another thing I like to do with products is know when they're back in stock. Don't mean to pick on Ubiquity, but sometimes things at Ubiquity are out of stock, and I'd like to know when they are back in stock. Let's say, for instance, we wanted to know when this G4 Instant is back in stock, because these things are always out of stock. So if you log in and create an account, you can actually subscribe to their in-stock notifications. And nothing against Ubiquity, this is just kind of how it works, I think, in retail, is that when they make it available on their website, it's available for the public to buy, and that could be before people who signed up for a notification. Not saying that's what they do, I'm just saying it's a possibility. So to get around that possibility, you could just track it yourself. If I really wanted this, I would sign up and subscribe to in-stock emails, and I would check it. But for the sake of example, let's copy this URL. Let's go back to our change detection and let's paste it in here. And let's do a watch and edit this time. I'm going to call this Unify G4 Instant. And then again, I'm going to call this shopping. I could call it whatever I want, but I kind of want all of these shopping items to be together on the dashboard. I still need to show you that. So let's save it here, and it's queued up. It's going out to check. And while that's checking, I'll show you that these tags right here actually line up to these headers right here. So if I wanted to filter by tech news, ChangeDetection IO, those were the two examples that were here, or personal, shopping, there are my two right there, or software, and those are those right there. So let's go back to all, and hey, it says, hey, embedded price detected, follow price data only. I'm going to say no, because I forgot to do something. When you actually want to set up a restock detection, let's edit this, you have to make sure that you switch to a restock detection mode. And that's all you need to do. So by default, it's going to parse and render and maybe look for price and look for changes. But when you switch to a restock notification, it's specifically going to look for something that is out of stock, and it knows how to track that from when that changes back to in stock. So let's save that and let it run again. It's queued up, and you can see here that it has a label now of not in stock. Cool, so it's doing restock notifications. Let's do the preview just to make sure. Hey, you can see on the text now, it's saying that it detects sold out. That's pretty awesome. So it's not detecting all of the text on that page. It's just looking for sold out to see if that changes. And then the screenshot, we can see that, yes, the G4 Instant is being rendered. This is what we want to see. And so it's good to go. There are so many things I want to track and so many cool things you could do with ChangeDetection.io. I'm glad I installed it, and I'm glad I went through with getting the Headless browser configured, because I think that really makes this worth it. So what are you going to track with Change Detection? Let me know in the comments below. A huge, huge thank you to Docker for sponsoring today's video. I'm Tim. Thanks for watching.